Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Retro Café series, and today I'll be covering my review for Final Fantasy XVI captured on a PS5. Now, this has been a review around 3 months in the making, and as of writing this today I've now fully beaten the game and I'm currently going through a New Game Plus playthrough. By the way, this review will be split up into the game's story, gameplay, art and music, missions and extras, the boss fights, spoilers and the ending. So if you want to go ahead and skip to the story spoilers and my thoughts on the actual ending and post-credit scene, you can skip ahead there, but obviously there will be mild spoilers, so I'll put a spoiler warning here, because obviously certain items and things I use in the gameplay obviously spoil certain character moments and things like that, so you have been warned now. So let's get on with the review. So starting off with my thoughts on the main story. If you're new to Final Fantasy XVI, I know the number can put certain people off, especially newcomers, but I'm here to tell you that since Final Fantasy is an anthology series, meaning that not all the games are connected, you don't actually need any prior knowledge or sort of past playthroughs of past Final Fantasy games to actually enjoy Final Fantasy XVI. Like Final Fantasy XV, Final Fantasy XVI was intended for newcomers and Final Fantasy veterans alike. This new entry takes place in the realm of Valsifia, and here warring nations fight for the Mother Crystals, each nation's source of power and magic, as they fight for the actual dominants and icons. Dominants are people who channel and control abilities of the summons from past Final Fantasy games, known as icons. Now, if you're a Final Fantasy fan here, you'll recognise some of these being Titan, Odin, Ifrit and many more, especially with new ones such as Phoenix and Garuda for example. In Final Fantasy XVI, we play as Clive Rossfield. Due to events in his childhood, Clive becomes a dominant, being able to transform into and channel Ifrit's fire abilities. Clive, after meeting Sid, teams up with a bunch of outlaws in the Hideaway to fight for the common folk, free slave bearers, and destroy the Mother Crystals. That's actually his main objective for the game, to help free and unite the entire realm. Some of my thoughts on the main story are as follows. I loved it overall. Ironically, since the series has gone back to its fantasy roots with obviously sort of newer titles being more realistic in sort of modern day settings, in my opinion this is the most realistic Final Fantasy game in terms of narrative and character interactions and character story moments. I thought Clive was a great main protagonist, with side characters such as Jill, Gav, Sid and more being extremely relatable, with each having extremely impactful moments. The story as a whole was easy to follow from start to finish, plus if you visit Vivian or her Hippocrates, also known as Tomes in the Hideaway, you can actually read up on the current state of the realm, what's currently going on in the story, as well as lore tabs for each character, weapon, location, country, person of interest, etc. So you can actually understand more about what's going on if you're stuck, about what characters' motives are, and it gives you individual sections to keep you up to date with the story. I will admit there were a few too many characters talking, and it went on for a bit too long, and cutscenes especially in side quests had this, with me skipping some of them entirely as I felt as though they were either dragging on far too long or I just wasn't interested in what they were saying. But this was only for a few of the actual smaller side quests. The writing overall is superb, with one moment near the end making me actually tear up, and I can say as a Brit, hearing mostly British voices with actually spot on slang and speech was actually really nice and refreshing to hear. And characters like Goots and Sid, they actually have slang and accents that you don't usually hear in games written by sort of JRPGs and Americans, so it is nice to hear on that front. Next up, the gameplay. Now, Final Fantasy XVI deviates from past games by being a semi-open world RPG, being more action-oriented. This is due to the fact that obviously Square Enix obviously made the game. However, the game was actually assisted by Platinum Games, so that's pretty action-focused right there. The easiest way to describe it is Nier Automata meets Bayonetta meets Final Fantasy VII Remake in terms of gameplay. You essentially hack and slash at enemies whilst using Eikon abilities to deal damage to enemies. Effectively, you have to keep damaging enemies until a stagger meter appears. When their stagger meter is depleted, you then have the option to essentially do extra damage to them by using your abilities. The combat, by the way, is really smooth, intuitive and easy to master, similar to games like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry. And when you actually do you string together like a really big combo and deal loads of damage, it feels really great. Now, some of the more crazier ones that I've left out due to spoilers, but the Eikon abilities are really cool in using them. Channeling the Phoenix as Clive lets you set enemies on fire and deal sort of large fiery AoE attacks. Titan focuses on blocking and countering at the right time, so you can like block and then you can suddenly let out like a flurry of punches. And Garuda focuses on more sort of aerial abilities and stringing combos and getting enemies and launching them in the air. Obviously there are more, but I can't talk about a few of them due to spoilers in the story, because some of them you get from specific characters and their fate is, you know, up to there. So I'll leave it there for now, because those three are actually in the demo, so it's technically not a spoiler. Clive also has Torgal, your canine companion who joins you through the playthrough and can be used to heal you, attack enemies, launch them in the air to start aerial combos, which is actually super useful sort of early on in the game, and he can even help find chests and items, as well as showing you where to go next if you get stuck. I loved Torgal as I'm a big dog lover and a big dog person. I'm definitely not a cat person, I'm more of a dog person myself. And yes, you can even pet him as well as give him treats, which I thought was brilliant. In terms of the art and music, the gameplay on screen, by the way, was captured at 4K on a PS5, but I did end up playing at 1080p 60 frames for smoother combat. Obviously you have the performance mode and the other mode for sort of higher frame rate, but the game overall, which regardless looks gorgeous, and there were even moments in my playthrough where I just simply stopped in awe to take in the sights and the background audio. I just think the actual realm and the world that you're playing in looks stunning, especially on PS5. I imagine if you're playing on the highest end of PCs, I imagine this game will look amazing, but it still looks stunning on PS5, with landscapes varying from deserts to deep forests to medieval inspired castles to derelict towns to deep ruins, and it's just gobsmacking, some of it. Plus the music. Now, Final Fantasy games are known for having some of the best soundtracks in gaming. Although it's not my favourite Final Fantasy soundtrack, Final Fantasy XVI's music was expertly composed, with some of my favourite tracks being the main battle theme, the main menu theme, the Eikon boss fight theme, the Titan boss theme, as well as the actual theme that plays in the Hideaway. I just think it's like a really chill sort of medievally style, I don't know how you'd call it, like a song where you've got like acoustic guitar playing. It's just really nice and calm. In terms of missions and extras, speaking of the Hideaway though, it acts as your main hub area, featuring everything you need in one convenient place, similar to if you've ever played it, Borderlands 2's Sanctuary. It has vendors, gear upgrades, forging, crafting, characters to get main and side quests from, the Arete Stone, which can be used to sort of practice combos on enemies, replay story missions, as well as start arcade mode, which is basically where you replay the game but with a score meter and an actual score in the background. And many more things are here, but the Hideaway has loads of interesting things, and each of the characters in the Hideaway have their own specific storylines which you can actually follow as the game unfolds, and it's just really nice to see, because obviously the game takes place over several years, because you play as Clive as a child, a sort of early adult, and then late into sort of his mid to late 30s, and then the game sort of progresses as, you know, you're doing that. And with that, the other characters in the Hideaway progress in time, and it's nice to see those storylines from beginning to end. The game is structured differently to other Final Fantasy games, however. You have a world map where you can actually fast travel to open areas. These are sort of semi-open world areas because although they are connected, some of them are actually linear. Here you have entire cities and towns to explore where you can get missions as well as progressing the story and find secrets. However, most of the actual main missions are sort of, you can't travel back to some of them as they are linear and they can't be revisited. But this is fine because it makes those moments even more special, but they can be replayed, like I said, if you go to the Hideaway. Now, boss fights. I know this is a bit weird that it gets its own segment, but I really wanted to talk about the boss fights here. These, in my opinion, are some of the best boss fights in video game history, which I know is a massive statement, a massive claim, but seriously, play them for yourself and you will see. Now, I'll cover some of these more in the spoiler section, but some of these fights usually involve Clive facing off another sort of monster or an Eikon user, such as Benedicta, who you fight, who is the Eikon user for Garuda. And obviously, without spoiling it, you do eventually get that power, but for example, she fights you with Garuda and you have this massive fight early on in the game, and then as you progress through the game you essentially have Ifrit going against these other summons, these other icons, and it's these huge, grandiose, massive scale fights that are just awesome to watch and sort of actually play through, which was nice. Yeah, you have some moments that are sort of cutscene oriented and the game is sort of driving itself, but for the majority of it you are actually playing through the cutscenes effectively. But this is just the early fight, and the ones towards the end actually get really crazy and massive in scope and feel really satisfying to actually play. Now for the spoiler section. By the way, here is your last chance if you don't want any massive story spoilers or any character moments or ability spoil for you, so here we go. Now, the main story revolves around Ultima. Ultima is sort of revealed when it's also revealed that Joshua is still alive from the beginning of the game, and Ultima is this god with the ultimate plan of essentially rewriting the world to make mankind subservient and to basically eradicate all life and then restart it again, which obviously the main characters don't want. Personally, I wasn't massive on Ultima. I didn't really like Ultima at the beginning when he's introduced sort of midway through the game, but I did feel like after I got to learn more about Ultima and the actual plot and the lore and the backstory behind it, I thought the final confrontation leading up to Ultima was epic, and it was just grandiose on scale, and it involves all the characters that you meet throughout the story, which was nice. But I loved the actual final two bosses at the game, with the final fight feeling again grandiose in scale. I love Clive's personal relationships in this game, especially with Gav, Uncle Byron, Joshua, and most importantly Jill. I really love Clive's romance with Jill in this game, and it made her final goodbye and the scene at the very end with them watching the moon really bittersweet. As for the ending though, I thought the game ended well, but I would have liked to have had a bit more shown with the aftermath of how the Hideaway and a lot of the side characters got on after Ultima's defeat and Clive's essential death. We don't actually see Clive dying on screen, it's sort of left up to interpretation, but it does look like Clive obviously succumbs to the curse of being a bearer and a magic and ether user, and then he effectively dies on the beach, which again made me tear up fighting back tears, because again at the end of the day, after my 80 plus hour playthrough, I got really attached to Clive as a main character, and I just didn't want to see him go. I really wanted a happy ending with him and Jill, but unfortunately we didn't get that. I also liked the post-credit scene, even if it was a bit ambiguous with the fate of Joshua and Clive sort of up in the air, but I really like the scene with the book on the windowsill just reading. It's a book titled Final Fantasy, and it's actually written by Joshua, and I think it fits perfectly into the series as a whole, and I think Final Fantasy XVI as a game, I think it fits really nicely into sort of that slot of being a Final Fantasy game. I think it definitely lives up to the hype, and it's a nice bookend to the game's journey. As it stated, although Clive's journey ended, another now begins, and hopefully this new world they've created, get on and prosper. So in terms of the final scores, so I'd finally like to give Final Fantasy XVI a 9 out of 10. Final Fantasy XVI is an awe-inspiring masterpiece, and it's one of my actual all-time favourite Final Fantasy games, which I wasn't expecting, and it's also one of my favourite action games in general due to how smooth the combat system is, the skill tree is, and the items and everything like that, the abilities, how smooth and how well organised it all is. I think it's just one of my favourite Final Fantasy games, and as a long-time fan of the series, I can definitely now say, after beating the game and completing all the hunts, the side quests, you know, getting all the signboards and everything like that, and doing essentially all that the game delivers on, I just thought the game really delivered on every front. Music, art, actual how the game functions, the combat, the actual characters, as well as the writing, whilst also providing a captivating narrative, I can't even talk now, breathtaking visuals and engaging gameplay. Without a doubt, Final Fantasy XVI deserves a high rating. I was actually at one point going to give it a 10, but I think it just due to the ending and a few other things, it just misses that mark, so I've decided to give it a 9, and in my opinion is a must-have PS5 exclusive. I think the game, I'm not 100%, but I know the game was sort of developed for PC, so if in the future it ever comes to Xbox, for example, or other platforms, I definitely recommend getting it. But yeah, Final Fantasy 16 was just an amazing experience, and I'm kind of sad it's over. I'm kind of happy that now I get to play other games because it did eat up a lot of my time, but anyway, thank you so much for watching my Final Fantasy 16 review, and for more sort of reviews in the Retro Café series, if you go onto the channel, there'll be a playlist at the end of this video as well as in the description where you can go watch. I've covered Super Mario Galaxy and various other games as well, so if you guys want to go ahead and watch that, it'd be much appreciated. And on the Retro Café series before, we were covering sort of older titles, whereas I'm now going to cover current titles as well. And I'm going to sort of bookend it into one sort of, I guess, series, which I'm very excited for. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and for more videos from the Retro Cafe series, and for more reviews, and for more Final Fantasy videos, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.